Chapter 1. Morning comes in soft gold, sliding across the Carter kitchen like a quiet promise. Julian stands at the stove, coaxing pancakes to bubble, the pan hissing a gentle applause. Claire, in a unicorn T2 sizes too small because she refuses to retire it, drums a fork against her plate and counts the bubbles aloud. Audrey glides in last, hair clipped back, blazer draped over her arm, phone in her hand like a second pulse. She kisses Claire's crown, murmurs something about spelling tests, then accepts a pancake with the practiced smile of a woman who's been here 1,000 times and yet is already halfway out the door. Julian flips the next pancake and watches her without really watching. He knows the choreography. Audrey sets her bag down, checks the time, tilts her head at the calendar on the fridge. "Big campaign review," he says casual. "Just the usual fires," she answers, but her thumb is already unlocking the phone. A bloom of blue light touches her cheekbones. Her eyes skim. The smallest crease touches her mouth and vanishes. Claire leans on her elbows. "Daddy made the ones with chocolate chips like you like." "I do like them," Audrey says, returning the phone face down. She tries a bite, smiles, then reaches for coffee as if caffeine might catch her before she slips. "You're a lifesaver, Jules." He hears the nickname and relaxes a fraction. "School drop-off, or should I?" "I'll take her," Audrey says a little too quickly. "I have a meeting downtown at 9. I'll be passing by." She smooths Claire's hair. "New shoes today." Claire kicks a sneaker under the table by accident and giggles. They light up. Brooke's flowers sit in a jar by the window, sunny, fierce marigolds from the Saturday market, stems cut short and strong. Audrey had laughed when she received them. Brooke always knows when a room needs loud, uncomplicated color. Now those flowers blaze against the stainless steel, a tiny bonfire of certainty. Julian sips coffee and lets the warmth sit behind his ribs. The kitchen's ordinary music is comforting. Plate clinks, chair legs, the faint hum of the fridge. It's something microscopic is off, like a picture frame tilted a degree. When Julian sets a pancake on Audrey's plate, she thanks him without lifting her eyes. When he reaches for syrup, she withdraws her hand a beat too late, and they brush fingers, both pretending not to notice the startle. "Practice tonight?" Audrey asks Claire. "Ms. Rivera said maybe," Claire says, "because the auditorium is getting painted." Ms. Rivera said ventilation. "That means air." She beams at having caught a grown-up word. "Smart girl," Audrey says, and in that moment she is entirely mother, entire warmth. Julian touches the edge of the calendar magnet with his thumb. 2 blocks of color on Audrey's phone screen had flashed earlier when she unlocked it. A line of meetings pressed together like stacked plates. He wants to ask about her late nights, about the way she laughs, and then pulls back, as if stepping onto a stage she's not sure she belongs on. Instead, he says, "I can handle dinner if you'll be late." "Don't wait up," she says lightly, and kisses his temple. Her mouth is cool, coffee bitter. "We're presenting to the investors' rep tomorrow. Today's prep hell." Mitchell's still leading it. Julian asks, as if naming a colleague were the least meaningful choice in the world. The pause is microscopic, barely the width of breath. "He's coordinating," Audrey says. It's his account. Claire slurps the last sweet of her syrup and announces she's ready. Audrey scoops up bag and keys. Her phone buzzes, and she flips it over out of reflex. A message hangs on the lock screen long enough for Julian to catch the shape of it. Not the full heart. 7 p.m.? Same place. M. The device disappears into her blazer pocket like a coin into water. The ripples are small, but undeniable. "I'll pick up cupcakes after school," Audrey tells Claire, too bright now. For Ms. Rivera's ventilation. They laugh. The moment glosses itself, shiny and convincing. At the door, Audrey turns back. "Don't forget the estimate for the Briarwood client," she says. "They're anxious." "I won't," he says, and he won't. He measures twice, always. It's how he builds, houses days explanations. The front door sighs shut. Through the window, he watches his family become a moving picture. Audrey leaning to buckle Claire in, Claire talking with her hands, tiny fireworks. Audrey's head tips down toward her pocket. The light on her face is not the sun. The house breathes. The marigolds catch the light and flare. Julian rinses plates he could leave in the sink and lines them on the rack, the neat geometry of them arguing for order. Water runs over his knuckles, hot enough to sting. He thinks of the text he didn't see, of the name he said like a test, Mitchell, and of the way Audrey's mouth shifted half a degree. By the time the faucet stops, the kitchen is silent enough to hear his own pulse. He reaches for the dish towel, then stops. Audrey's phone charger, usually coiled beside the coffee maker, is gone. Her spare lipstick, a little bullet of red, is gone. The jar of marigolds watches him with a patient, unblinking blaze. He dries his hands, picks up the calendar marker, and writes Briarwood, 4 p.m. in his careful block letters. The ink pools at the end of the line, a dark bead that refuses to settle. Outside, a car horn chirps. Inside, the phone on the counter buzzes not at all. Julian stands very still, like a man listening for a sound he's not yet ready to hear. Chapter 2. The city leaned into autumn with a quiet chill, the kind that sharpened edges and painted glass in silver light. Julian parked his truck outside Briarwood Estates and sat for a moment longer than usual, fingers resting on the steering wheel. His mind wasn't on blueprints. It was on Audrey's pause when he said Mitchell's name, the text message that flickered like static in his memory. He shook it off. Work demanded precision, not suspicion. Inside the half-built house, sawdust clung to the air, golden flecks spinning in shafts of light. His crew waited for instructions, boots scuffing the plywood floor. Julian spread the plans, drew neat lines with his pencil, spoke with the measured authority that always steadied him. Every wall, every measurement was certain. Yet under his voice, another rhythm ticked. Audrey's phone lighting her face, the unseen smile meant for someone else. "Boss," one of the men asked, "we shift the load bearing here, or keep it central?" Julian blinked, forced his focus back. Central. Always central. His voice was steady, but his stomach felt hollow. When the day's work ended, he stayed behind, walking the unfinished hallways alone. Houses were promises, he always told clients. Blueprints made flesh, certainty out of air. But promises depended on trust. Without it, everything collapsed. At home, Claire bounded into his arms, chattering about cupcakes and Ms. Rivera's jokes. Her laughter filled the living room, innocent and bright. Brooke stopped by with a bottle of wine, claiming she was in the neighborhood. She sat with Julian after Claire went to bed, the marigolds between them on the counter. "You're quiet," Brooke said, tilting her head. More than usual. Julian hesitated. He wasn't the kind to voice shadows, but tonight the silence pressed too heavily. "Do you ever feel someone slipping away, but you can't catch them?" Brooke's eyes sharpened. "This about Audrey?" He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. Brooke exhaled, setting her glass down. "I've seen Mitchell at those industry mixers. He's charming, but the kind who talks while calculating." Julian's chest tightened. "You think? I think you should be careful," she said gently. "People like him don't just appear. They look for cracks." Later that night, Julian lay awake beside Audrey, who scrolled her phone in the glow of the screen. She turned when she felt his gaze, smiled, and slid the phone face down on the nightstand. "Long day?" she asked softly. "Yeah," he whispered. Her hand touched his, warm and familiar, but her eyes closed too quickly, shutting the conversation down before it began. In the dark, Julian stared at the ceiling, listening to her breathing even out. His pulse didn't match hers. It beat harder, faster, with the certainty of a man who could build walls and roofs, but wasn't sure he could protect what mattered most. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Mitchell's name echoed like a crack in a foundation, small but growing. Would you like me to end each chapter like this, with a suspenseful beat that naturally pulls into the next one? That way, when we move to Chapter 3, it feels seamless and cinematic, exactly like a continuous movie. Chapter 3, The Outsider Appears. The agency's conference room pulsed with energy the next morning, glass walls glowing against the city skyline. Audrey straightened her blazer as she walked in, the sound of her heels sharp and certain, though inside her nerves tangled. Today's prep session mattered. Investors arrive tomorrow. She scanned the table, folders stacked, screens flickering, coffee cups scattered like tokens of fatigue. And then, of course, he was there. Mitchell leaned casually against the far wall, tie loosened just enough to seem confident rather than careless. His smile arrived before his words, charming and disarming in the same breath. "Audrey," he said warmly, his voice low enough to feel private despite the crowded room. "Glad you're here. You're the only one who can keep these guys on track." Her colleagues laughed, the compliment cloaked as a joke. Audrey felt her face warm. She wanted to roll her eyes, to brush it off, but something in the way he held her gaze made her pause a beat too long. The meeting began, slides clicking, voices rising with urgency. Deadlines stacked like bricks. Audrey contributed as she always did, clear, sharp, efficient. Yet whenever she spoke, Mitchell's eyes found her, holding steady. Each glance landed like a spark, small, deniable, but alive. At lunch break, she gathered her notes and stepped into the hallway. Mitchell followed, his stride unhurried. "You saved us in there," he said, his tone conspiratorial. "Without you, we'd still be arguing over fonts." She chuckled despite herself. "I doubt that." "No, really." His voice dropped. "You carry the room. They don't even realize it, but I do." Audrey opened her mouth to deflect, but the sincerity, or the illusion of it, slipped past her guard. For months, she'd felt invisible at home, her efforts swallowed by silence. Here, in the sterile buzz of fluorescent lights, someone was looking straight at her. Back at the office, Julian worked late, drafting the Briarwood plans. He glanced at the clock, wondering if Audrey would be home for dinner. She'd texted a vague, running late. He told himself it was nothing unusual, yet he caught himself staring at his phone every few minutes, waiting for a message that never came. When Audrey finally walked through the door, Claire was already asleep on the couch, cartoons flickering in half-light. Audrey kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering apologies, then sank into the armchair with an exhaustion that felt staged. Julian studied her from the kitchen doorway. "Long day," she nodded, pulling her phone closer. Meetings stacked back to back. "Tomorrow's huge." With Mitchell, the question slipped out sharper than he intended. Audrey froze for half a second, then smiled thinly. "Yes, he's the account lead, Jules. You know that." The air between them cooled. Julian wanted to press, to ask why she hadn't looked him in the eye, why her laughter at the dinner table felt thinner these days. But instead he swallowed his suspicion and returned to the sink, rinsing dishes that didn't need rinsing. In the bedroom later, Audrey scrolled her phone under the covers, her screen lighting her face like a secret lantern. A message blinked across. "Tomorrow, after the meeting. Just us. M." She hesitated, thumb hovering, then locked the screen. Beside her, Julian turned in his sleep, murmuring something she couldn't catch. She studied his face in the half-dark, the lines of trust carved there, the steadiness she once clung to. For a moment, guilt coiled in her chest. Then she turned away, staring into the dark, where Mitchell's words replayed, "You carry the room." And outside, the city hummed, waiting for tomorrow. Chapter 4. Temptation in Plain Sight. The next day unfolded beneath the gleam of glass towers, the kind of morning where everything looked polished, perfect, and deceptive. Audrey walked into the conference room with a calm mask, though her pulse beat quick under her collar. Investors weren't due until tomorrow, but today's prep was just as intense. Mitchell was already there, his jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled to the elbow. He radiated effortless control. "Audrey," he greeted with a grin that felt too personal for a professional room. "We're counting on you to work your magic." Her colleagues chuckled, some rolling their eyes, but Audrey caught the way his gaze lingered. Not playful this time, something heavier. She looked away, pretending to check her notes. The hours blurred into numbers, pitches, and heated debates. Mitchell often leaned close, his voice low, his cologne subtle but sharp. "What do you think?" he'd murmur, making it seem like her opinion outweighed the others combined. She knew the effect. Everyone else in the room saw it too. But no one spoke. At one point, their hands brushed when reaching for the same marker. The touch lasted less than a second, but it lingered far longer in her thoughts. She pulled back quickly, her cheeks warming. He only smiled knowingly, as if acknowledging an unspoken language. By the time the session ended, the sun had dipped, casting long shadows across the polished table. Audrey gathered her things, hoping to slip out unseen, but Mitchell caught her at the elevator. "You killed it today," he said, leaning casually against the frame. "Tomorrow's going to be a breeze because of you." "Don't exaggerate," she replied, though her lips curved despite herself. He tilted his head, studying her. "I don't exaggerate with you." The elevator doors slid open. Audrey stepped in, pulse racing. Mitchell held her gaze until the doors closed between them. At home, Julian worked on the Briarwood estimates, the lines of the blueprint sharp under his pencil. He paused, stretching his neck, listening for Audrey's car in the driveway. Instead, only the clock answered, ticking louder, slower. Claire peeked into his office, teddy bear tucked on her arm. "Mommy's not home yet." "Not yet," Julian said gently, lifting her into his lap. He forced a smile. "She's working hard. Big day tomorrow." Claire leaned against him, yawning. "You work hard too." Her simple truth cut deeper than she knew. Julian tucked her in a bed, then lingered by the doorway, watching her drift into dreams while unease gnawed at him. When Audrey finally arrived, her perfume lingered differently, brighter, sharper, like it carried someone else's air. She kissed his cheek, light and quick, before heading straight for the shower. Julian stayed in the kitchen, hands braced against the counter. A smear of marigold color caught his eye. Brooke's flowers, now beginning to wilt. Their petals curled inward, edges browned, still trying to burn against the dim light. He thought of Audrey's laughter, how it used to fill rooms without hesitation, and how now it seemed measured, distracted. He thought of Mitchell's name again, echoing in the spaces she left empty. Upstairs, the water shut off. The house fell silent. Julian closed his eyes, listening to that silence, heavy and telling, as though it carried words he didn't want to hear. Chapter 5: The Secret Meeting. The investor prep had ended earlier than expected, but Audrey lingered in the office, her fingers tracing idle circles on the rim of a coffee cup. The conference room was empty now, echoes of voices still clinging to the glass walls. She should have gone home. Claire would be waiting, Julian too, but Mitchell's message pulsed in her phone. Same place. Just us. When she finally stood, her reflection in the darkened glass startled her. Blazer sharp, lipstick just faded, eyes alive in a way they hadn't been in months. She slipped her phone in her bag, telling herself it was only a quick talk, nothing dangerous. Mitchell waited in the lounge downstairs, tie gone, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked more like a man at ease in the world than a colleague burdened by deadlines. "Thought you'd make me wait longer," he teased, his smile curving in a way that made denial impossible. "I almost didn't come," Audrey said, her voice low, uncertain. "But you did." His eyes held hers, steady and deliberate. They sat by the window, city lights sprawling below like a map of temptation. The conversation began with work, the investors, projections, the chaos of deadlines. But soon the edges softened. Mitchell leaned closer, his voice dipped lower, and the talk shifted from numbers to dreams. "You deserve more than late nights and ungrateful faces," he said. "You hold everything together, and no one even sees it." Audrey laughed lightly, shaking her head. "You make me sound like some tragic heroine." "I'm just telling the truth." His gaze was unwavering. "Julian doesn't see it, does he?" The name landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading through her chest. She looked away, heart hammering. "That's not," she started, but the protest faded. Mitchell leaned back, studying her silence. "You don't have to answer. I can see it in your eyes." The air between them thickened. A pause stretched long, heavy, electric. Audrey's breath quickened, her thoughts tangling between loyalty and longing. For the first time in years, she felt seen. She stood suddenly, clutching her bag. "I should go." Mitchell rose too, but slower, deliberate. "Audrey," he said softly, and when she turned, his hand brushed hers, warm, confident, lingering just enough to blur the line. Her pulse leapt. She pulled back, but not far enough. His smile was knowing, as though the moment had already been written. Across town, Julian set the dinner table for 3, though the clock made it clear it would only be 2. He reheated pasta, helped Claire with homework, tucked her into bed. The house grew still, except for the faint ticking of the clock in the hall. When Audrey finally walked in, the smell of perfume clung to her, not the familiar trace of her morning spray, but sharper, newer, as though it belonged to a different place. She kissed Julian quickly, murmured about work running late, and disappeared upstairs before he could respond. Julian remained at the table, staring at her untouched plate. The marigolds by the window had begun to shed, petals scattered like quiet warnings across the counter. He picked one up, pressed it between his fingers, and wondered when small absences had become gaping voids. Upstairs, Audrey closed the bathroom door and leaned against it, breathing hard. In her mind, Mitchell's words replayed, warm and intoxicating. "You deserve more." And though she hadn't crossed the line, not yet, the floor beneath her felt dangerously thin, as if one more step would send her tumbling. Chapter 6. Crossing the Line. The day of the investor meeting arrived with a storm pressing against the city. Glass walls shivered under the rain, and tension thickened in the conference room like fog. Audrey delivered her points flawlessly, her voice calm and certain, every slide a reflection of weeks of work. Applause followed, handshakes exchanged, promises made. To everyone else, the meeting was victory. To Audrey, it was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. When the last investor left, the room emptied quickly, leaving only her and Mitchell. He closed his laptop with deliberate slowness, watching her as though the presentation had never ended. "You were brilliant," he said softly, walking closer. "They listened because of you. Not me, not anyone else." She busied herself gathering papers, pretending the compliment didn't seep under her skin. "It was a team effort." "No," he replied, his voice firm. "You carried us." The words echoed. She glanced up, and their eyes locked. For one suspended second, she didn't hear the rain, the hum of the projector, or the shuffling of distant footsteps. She heard only her own heartbeat, loud, insistent. When she moved toward the door, Mitchell stepped aside, but didn't let her pass. "Come with me," he murmured, not a question, but a request heavy with intent. "Mitchell," she began, but her protest weakened before it even left her mouth. He guided her out, down the hall, to a side office no one used. The door clicked shut behind them. Silence wrapped the space. Audrey set her bag down, unsure if her hands were trembling from nerves or anticipation. Mitchell leaned close, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you don't feel this, and I'll stop." Her breath caught. She wanted to say it, to end this before it shattered the fragile structure of her life. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood frozen as he reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was intimate, disarming, impossible to ignore. His hand lingered, his thumb grazing her cheek. "Mitchell," she whispered, her voice breaking between resistance and surrender. And then the space between them vanished. His mouth pressed to hers, warm, certain, claiming what had been building in glances and half-words for weeks. For a heartbeat, Audrey stiffened, guilt clawing at her chest. But then her body betrayed her resolve. Leaning in, answering the kiss with the hunger of someone starved of being seen, of being wanted. The kiss deepened. Her hands clutched his shirt, his arms circled her waist. The world outside disappeared. The storm raged against the glass, but inside, the noise was their own. When they finally broke apart, breathing ragged, Audrey stared at him, wide-eyed, panic and desire colliding inside her. "This is wrong," she whispered. "Then why did it feel so right?" Mitchell's voice was steady, assured. She pressed her forehead to his chest, torn in two. In that moment, she knew she had crossed a line she could never uncross. At home, Julian sat at Claire's bedside, reading her favorite story. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed distraction. The chair beside him felt too empty, the house too quiet. When Claire asked, "Is Mommy coming to say goodnight?" he hesitated before answering. "She's working late," he said softly. Downstairs, The marigolds in the jar sagged further, petals falling one by one, as if marking time. Julian picked one up absent-mindedly, crushing it between his fingers. And somewhere across town, in a dim office with rain streaking the windows, Audrey was no longer just late. She was lost. Chapter 7. The Web of Lies. The morning after, Audrey woke with the taste of guilt still bitter on her lips. She showered longer than usual, scrubbing at her skin as though the water could erase what had happened in that dim office with Mitchell. By the time she stepped out, Julian was already downstairs making breakfast. Claire's laughter drifted up, innocent and oblivious. For one fleeting moment, Audrey wanted to crawl back into bed and pretend the last 12 hours had been a dream. Instead, she fixed her hair, painted on a smile, and rehearsed her lines. At the kitchen table, Julian looked up from the newspaper. "You're up early for once." Audrey's laugh came too quickly. "Big day. Investors want a follow-up call." She kissed his cheek, carefully casual, careful not to let him notice the way her body tensed when his eyes lingered. Claire chattered about school projects and friends, pulling Audrey's attention like an anchor back to what mattered. Yet every time she smiled at her daughter, a whisper gnawed inside. "You're lying to both of them." At the office, Mitchell greeted her with the same easy grin, as though last night had been inevitable, ordinary. He leaned close when no one was watching. "Lunch? Just us." Audrey shook her head quickly, panic sparking. "We can't. Not today." But later, where her phone buzzed with a text. "Need to see you. 10 minutes. Parking garage." Her pulse betrayed her, quickening. She told her assistant she was stepping out for a client call and slipped away. In a shadowed garage, Mitchell pulled her close before she could protest. "Don't pretend last night didn't happen," he murmured. "You felt it too." Audrey pushed against him lightly, but not enough to break free. "Mitchell, we have to be careful. People will notice." He smiled. "Then we'll be smarter. Lies are easy if you tell them with confidence." The words lodged in her chest. Lies. She hated the taste of them, but by the time she drove home that night, she had already rehearsed what to say if Julian asked why she was late. Julian did ask. "Another late one?" he said, setting down his fork. Audrey shrugged out of her blazer, keeping her tone breezy. "Client dinner ran long. You know how it is." Julian studied her, silent. He had built a career on attention to detail, and now those instincts turned inward. Audrey's hair was styled differently, her perfume stronger. She avoided his eyes. Claire bounded in, saving her mother with a question about cupcakes. Audrey bent low, hugging her daughter tightly, almost desperately, as if clinging to the one truth she still possessed. That night, Julian lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm of Audrey's breathing beside him. She had fallen asleep quickly, but he could not. His mind replayed small inconsistencies. The new perfume, the way she locked her phone, the hurried excuses. Downstairs, the marigolds Brooke had brought weeks ago now drooped in their jar, petals scattered across the counter. Julian stared at them earlier, wondering if flowers knew when their beauty had expired, if they resisted or simply surrendered. He turned onto his side, facing Audrey's back. He wanted to reach out, to touch her shoulder, to believe this was still the same woman he'd built a life with. Instead, he lay still, the silence between them louder than any storm. In the dark, one truth settled heavy in his chest. Something was slipping, unraveling thread by thread. And if he didn't catch it soon, the whole fabric of their lives would tear apart. Chapter 8. Discovery in the Dark. Julian had never thought of himself as a suspicious man. He was steady, practical, the kind who believed that trust was the foundation of everything. But lately, trust felt like thin ice beneath his feet. He could hear it cracking with every step. That evening, the house was quiet. Claire had fallen asleep early after a long day at school, her drawings still scattered across the coffee table. Audrey was upstairs catching up on work, or so she claimed. Julian sat alone in his office, the blueprints for Briarwood spread before him, but the lines blurred under his gaze. His mind was elsewhere, on the lies that had begun to knot around them. When he went upstairs later, the glow of Audrey's phone lit the bedroom in a soft pulse. She was in the shower, steam whispering against the door. The phone buzzed again, vibrating across the nightstand. Julian's hand hovered. He told himself he trusted her, that he wasn't that man. But the silence in their marriage, the evasions, the perfume that wasn't hers, each detail pressed on him like weight. Finally, his fingers closed around the phone. The screen unlocked with a swipe. Audrey never bothered with a code when she was home. Messages glowed in the chat thread at the top. Mitchell, last night was worth every risk. Mitchell, tomorrow? Same place. Audrey, can't. Too close. He's noticing. Mitchell, then we'll be smarter. I don't want to stop. Julian's chest tightened, his vision blurring as though the letters themselves had burned into his skin. He scrolled further, snippets of affection, plans to meet, words that had no place in a marriage. Each line confirmed what he already feared. He was no longer her only choice. The shower shut off. Panicked, Julian placed the phone back exactly where it had been. He moved to the dresser, pretending to adjust papers. When Audrey stepped out, wrapped in a towel, her smile seemed natural, unforced. But now Julian saw it differently, not as warmth, but as a mask. "You're still up?" she asked, toweling her hair. "Couldn't sleep," he answered, voice even. He studied her carefully, wondering how many of her gestures were rehearsed, how many lies hidden behind her casual tone. She sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through her phone again. This time, she angled it away, subtle but enough for Julian to notice. He swallowed hard, saying nothing. Later that night, long after Audrey drifted into sleep, Julian slipped downstairs. The marigolds were nearly dead now, stems bent, petals scattered like fragments of something once whole. He picked one up, crumbling it between his fingers, the dust falling like ash. In the darkness, one truth anchored itself. Audrey was hiding more than late nights and excuses. And Mitchell, his name no longer just a colleague, but the shadow between them, was the reason. Julian didn't know yet how he would confront it, or what it would destroy. But he knew this. The lies had crossed from suspicion into fact, and facts demanded reckoning. He stood by the window, staring into the night, the city lights flickering like signals in the distance. Upstairs, Audrey slept soundly, unaware that the world she'd built on secrecy was beginning to fracture. Chapter 9. The Confrontation. Julian had never felt nights stretch so long. He barely slept. The glow of Audrey's phone still burned into his mind, those messages replaying like a cruel film reel. By dawn, he wasn't sure if the tightness in his chest was anger or heartbreak, only that it demanded release. At breakfast, Claire sat cheerfully recounting a story about her teacher. Audrey laughed at the right moments, sliding toast onto her daughter's plate, but Julian watched her carefully. Every movement felt scripted, every smile rehearsed. She didn't notice the way his jaw clenched, or maybe she chose not to. "Big day again?" Julian asked, his tone deceptively calm. Audrey blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, more follow-ups. You know how it is. Another late night?" She hesitated. It was small, barely a pause, but to Julian it screamed louder than any denial. "Probably. Don't wait up." Julian nodded, but inside something snapped. He kissed Claire goodbye, grabbed his keys, and left without looking back. That evening, Julian drove downtown, parking across from the office garage. He told himself he was being paranoid, but his instincts sharpened with every passing minute. At 7:15, Audrey's car pulled in. She wasn't alone. Mitchell stepped out from the shadows, glancing around before meeting her by the stairwell. Julian's stomach turned, the sight confirming every fear. He wanted to storm across, to drag the truth into the light. But instead, he followed, slow, deliberate, until they disappeared into a side office whose blinds were half drawn. Through the gap, Julian saw it. Audrey laughing too freely, her hand brushing Mitchell's arm. Then the kiss. It wasn't tentative this time. It was hungry, reckless, undeniable. His heart hammered. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Rage collided with sorrow, and he turned away, fists trembling. But running from the truth was no longer an option. Audrey arrived home later than usual, hair tousled, excuses already on her lips. Sorry, Jules, the meeting. Stop, Julian cut in. His voice was steady, but colder than she'd ever heard it. She froze in the doorway, her bag slipping from her shoulder. What? I know, he said simply. About Mitchell. About everything. The color drained from her face. Julian, it's not. Don't lie. His words cracked like thunder. I saw you. Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Audrey opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, her rehearsed charm faltered. What? Julian asked, his voice breaking now, softer but sharper than any accusation. After everything we built, why him? Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't plan this. I just felt invisible. And her voice shook. He made me feel alive again. Julian laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. Alive? By destroying us? By destroying Claire's family? At the mention of their daughter, Audrey flinched as though struck. I never wanted to hurt her. But you did, Julian said. His eyes burned, but no tears came. Only fury and grief intertwined. You hurt all of us. The house felt smaller, walls pressing in, air heavier than ever before. Upstairs, Claire stirred in her sleep, unaware that her parents' world was fracturing beyond repair. Audrey reached for Julian's hand, desperate. We can fix this. Please. He pulled back, stepping away as though her touch carried fire. No, he said, voice raw. You crossed a line. There's no coming back. The words hung in the air like a sentence, final and devastating. Audrey's sobs filled the silence, but Julian turned away, staring out the window. The marigolds are gone now, thrown out that morning, leaving only the empty jar. A fitting symbol, he thought bitterly. Beauty, once full of color, reduced to nothing. And for the first time, Julian allowed himself to feel it fully. The heartbreak, the betrayal, the irreversible end of a life he thought he knew. Chapter 10, The Fallout. The morning after the confrontation felt eerily quiet, as though the house itself held its breath. Claire padded into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes, unaware of the storm that had erupted the night before. She climbed on her chair, asking for pancakes, her voice light and cheerful. Julian stood at the stove, spatula in hand, going through the motions. His face was calm, but his eyes were distant, hollow. Audrey hovered by the counter, her hair pulled back hastily, dark circles beneath her eyes betraying a sleepless night. Good morning, she said softly, as if a gentle tone could patch the cracks. Julian didn't answer. He flipped the pancake, the sizzle filling the silence. Claire chattered on, drawing suns and flowers on her napkin with a crayon, blissfully unaware. But Audrey noticed the way Julian's shoulders stiffened every time she spoke, the way his silence carved deeper than any scream. By mid-afternoon, the fallout spread beyond their walls. Brooke arrived with a bag of groceries, her bright smile faltering when she saw the tension in the room. What happened? She asked, setting the bag down. Julian's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Audrey turned away, shame pressing her down. Brooke's eyes darted between them, reading the truth in the silence. Finally, she whispered, It's him, isn't it? Mitchell. Julian's gaze snapped up. You knew. I suspected, Brooke admitted, her voice breaking. I tried to warn her. I saw the way he looked at her at that mixer months ago. She stopped, pressing her lips together. Julian's chair scraped loudly as he stood. So everyone saw it, but me. No, Brooke said quickly, tears welling. Julian, I wanted to believe she'd never. But he's dangerous. He's not who she thinks. Audrey flinched, guilt flooding her face. Don't, she whispered. Don't make this worse. Brooke turned on her. Worse? You've already shattered him. You've shattered Claire. Her voice shook with fury. Do you even understand what you've done? Audrey sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. For the first time, the weight of her choices pressed down fully, suffocating. That evening, Julian's parents called. Word had spread faster than he expected. His mother's voice trembled with worry, his father's tone sharp with disappointment. Son, you don't deserve this. Don't let her drag you further down. Audrey overheard, standing frozen at the top of the stairs, tears streaming silently. Claire peeked out from her bedroom, sensing the unease. "Daddy? Why is everyone sad?" she asked softly. Julian knelt, pulling her into his arms. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, sweetheart. But I'll always take care of you. Always." His voice cracked, but he forced a smile for her sake. Claire nodded, trusting him completely, even as the world around her tilted. Later, after Claire was asleep, Julian and Audrey sat across from each other at the kitchen table. The marigold jar was gone, the counter bare, like a wound stripped clean. "We can fix this," Audrey whispered again, her voice ragged. "Therapy, counseling, anything. I don't want to lose us." Julian's eyes were hard, glinting with the pain of betrayal. "You already lost us, Audrey. The moment you chose him, you chose to burn everything we built." She reached across the table, but he pulled back, leaving her hand suspended in the air, trembling. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was the sound of marriage unraveling, threads snapping one by one. And though no papers were signed, no official word spoken, they both knew nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 11. The Shocking Twist. The days that followed were heavy, each one layered with silence, suspicion, and the unspoken knowledge that their marriage was crumbling. Audrey spent her evenings in the study, pretending to work, while Julian buried himself in blueprints at the office. They crossed paths like strangers, speaking only when Claire was around, forcing smiles that never reached their eyes. But beneath the quiet surface, something darker was moving. One afternoon, Julian received a call from an old colleague at a rival firm. The man's tone was cautious, almost apologetic. "Julian, I thought you should know. Mitchell Blake's been shopping around your designs." Julian froze. "What are you talking about?" "Your Briarwood project. He's been presenting the plans as if they're his." I didn't want to believe it, but the details are too exact. Julian's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles white. Rage flared hot, but alongside it came clarity. Mitchell hadn't just been after Audrey. He'd been after him. That evening, Julian searched through Audrey's work bag while she showered. He hated himself for it, but instinct demanded proof. At the bottom, he found a folder, copies of his schematics, marked with Mitchell's initials. His blood ran cold. When Audrey walked in, towel wrapped around her, she saw the folder in his hands. Her face drained of color. "Julian, I can explain." "Explain what?" he snapped, his voice trembling with fury. "That you've been helping him steal from me? That while I was building our future, you were handing it over to him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It wasn't like that. He said it was just for feedback." Julian slammed the folder onto the bed. "Don't lie to me again. You think I don't see it now? He used you, Audrey. You weren't special to him. You were a doorway to me." The words hit her harder than a slap. She staggered back, pressing against the dresser for support. "No. He cares about me." Julian's laugh was bitter, hollow. "Cares? Audrey, he doesn't care about anyone but himself. You were just too blind to see it." That night, unable to bear the silence, Audrey drove to Mitchell's apartment. Her heart raced as she knocked, her mind desperate for reassurance. Mitchell opened the door, casual as ever, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Audrey, didn't expect you tonight." She stepped inside, words tumbling out. "Julian found out. He knows everything. He found the plans. Mitchell, please tell me you didn't." Mitchell cut her off with a smirk. "Of course I did." Audrey blinked, stunned. "What?" He set his glass down, unbothered. "You think this was about love? About you? Don't flatter yourself. You were useful. You gave me access. That's all." Her stomach dropped, the room tilting. "You used me," she whispered. "Everyone uses everyone," Mitchell said coldly. Julian was competition. "You were the easiest way in." Tears burned her eyes, but he only leaned back, sipping his drink. "Don't look so shocked. You wanted to feel alive, didn't you? Well, here it is. Real life. Ugly, selfish, and ruthless." Audrey stumbled out, the cold night air hitting her like a slap. Her chest heaved, betrayal slicing deeper than she thought possible. She had destroyed her marriage, jeopardized her family. And for what? For a man who saw her as nothing but a pawn. Back at home, Julian sat in the dark, waiting. When Audrey finally walked in, Her face streaked with tears. He didn't speak. He only looked at her, the silence heavier than any accusation. She collapsed into a chair, whispering, "You were right. About everything." Julian stared at her, eyes hollow. "That doesn't change what you did." And in that moment, Audrey realized the truth. She had lost Mitchell, she had lost Julian, and she was on the verge of losing Claire. The walls of her life were collapsing, and there was no way to stop the fall. Chapter 12. The Final Blow. The storm broke on a Friday evening, though no rain touched the streets. It was the storm inside the Carter household that finally reached its peak. Julian came home earlier than usual, his briefcase tucked under his arm, his face set like stone. Audrey sat at the kitchen table, a glass of untouched wine in front of her, her eyes red from crying. Claire colored in the living room, her laughter carrying faintly through the air, oblivious to the gravity pressing down on her parents. Julian placed a folder on the table. Inside were photographs, emails, and testimonies. Everything he had gathered about Mitchell's theft of his designs. Audrey stared at the evidence, her hand trembling. "You're going to the board with this?" she whispered. "I already did," Julian replied, his tone sharp and final. "Mitchell's career is finished. By Monday, he won't step foot in this industry again." Audrey swallowed hard. Shame burned through her, but beneath it was something else, fear. "And me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Julian met her eyes. "You made your choice, Audrey. You destroyed what we had. I can't protect you from the fallout." Her breath hitched. "Please, Julian, I never wanted to lose you." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't lose me, Audrey. You threw me away." The words cut deeper than any shout. That night, Julian packed a small bag. Claire peeked around the corner, teddy bear in her arms. "Daddy, where are you going?" Julian knelt, pulling her close. His voice cracked as he whispered, "I'm not leaving you, sweetheart. I'll always be here. But Mommy and I, we need space. Do you understand?" Claire's eyes shimmered with confusion, but she nodded, trusting him as she always did. From the doorway, Audrey watched, silent tears streaming. She wanted to reach for them, to mend what she had shattered, but the weight of her choices chained her in place. Days later, the scandal broke. News spread quickly through the agency. Mitchell had been caught red-handed, his reputation in ruins. Audrey's name surfaced in hushed whispers. How she had been close to him, how her loyalties had blurred. Her once bright career dimmed overnight, colleagues keeping their distance, friends avoiding eye contact. Brooke stopped by one evening, her expression cold. "I warned you," she said flatly, "but you wouldn't listen. And now Julian's gone, Mitchell's gone, and all that's left is the mess you made." Audrey collapsed into sobs after she left, the house echoing with emptiness. Meanwhile, Julian rebuilt, not just his projects, but himself. He poured his energy into Claire, into his work, into a future no longer tied to betrayal. The pain lingered, yes, but it hardened into resolve. He would not let Audrey's choices define him. One evening, he stood in his office, watching Claire draw at his desk. Her picture showed a house with two suns above it, as if one wasn't enough to keep the darkness away. "Why two suns?" Julian asked gently. Claire smiled. "So it's never dark." Julian swallowed the lump in his throat and kissed her head. In her innocence, she had given him what Audrey could not, hope. Back at the house, Audrey sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the empty marigold jar. She thought of Julian's words, Mitchell's betrayal, Brooke's fury, and the family she had broken. The silence around her was unbearable, the absence of laughter louder than any scream. The final blow had fallen, not in anger, but in absence. Julian was gone. Mitchell was destroyed, and Audrey was left with nothing but the ruins of her choices. She whispered into the silence, "I'm sorry," but there was no one left to hear.